Hi, okay, so in this tutorial we're going to have a introduction to particles. I'm going to create a short example of particles at work, and in order to do that, actually I've got a still image, but before I start on that I just want to quickly mention what particles actually are. I'd say they're usually referred to as particle systems, and that's because they're basically a system of rules, okay, or properties that you set up. So you kind of tell a particle what it can and can't do, or how things work. And once you've done that, and once you've set up those rules, it just kind of follows them. So I'd say that's basically what a particle system is. And I'll kind of mention a few examples of it when we started creating one. So you'll get a better idea once we've made one. So I'm going to take this snow background still image we've got. I'm just going to use particles to basically create some snowfall on top of the image. Okay, so there are. If I go into my effects panel here and I start typing in particle, you'll see there's three types available. Okay, and it's particle playground we're going to look at this point, which is a 2D particle system. So in other words, the particles themselves move in two dimensions, either up and down, left and right, but they have no depth to them. The CC particle world is a 3D particle system, and that one can move in three dimensions, and we'll have a look at that in a separate tutorial once we've had a look at particle playground first, really. But I'd say once you kind of understand how to manipulate a 2D system, you'll see that it can be quite similar with a 3D, although 3D has a few other options. But yeah, there's a lot of additional options that just basically give you depth as well. The CC particle systems I haven't used, so I couldn't really refer to that one as much. I think it's supposed to be like a 2.5D, I think, but I'm not too sure. But like I said, it's particle world generally if I want 3D, or particle playground if I'm looking at 2D that I'd work with. Today we're going to start off with a 2D system. So if I drop that onto there, or onto our still image to use it, you'll see that the still image itself has disappeared. Okay, and there is actually something there. If I start to play this, that's how a particle system has it on its default settings. So if I run the playhead, you'll see there's the particles running. So the particles basically self-animate based on, like I said, the properties that you give. So I'll just undo that. So what you'll find is obviously the particles basically sort of need a layer to run on. So when you apply them onto a layer, which I did just then, dropped it onto the background, they sort of took over that layer. So whatever is on there originally disappears. So I guess I could just duplicate it and drop it onto a new one as a quick way to do it. What I'll do is I'll create a new solid to use, and I'll actually call the solid snow. Okay, there we go. So there's our new solid, and I'll drop that on top. Okay, so there we go. So you can see now it disappeared. It didn't matter what color the solid was. It was a gray color, I think, by default. I wasn't really too concerned with that. Because like I said, it was going to go away. So we've got our particle, and like I said, you won't see obviously at the beginning, but as I play through, there it goes, and it's sort of falling down. So we're going to have a look at some of the properties that are making this happen, and those are generally in the canon, and a bit of gravity is involved as well, so we'll have a look at that too. So if I go into the canon, see we've got position property, so we can, again, like I said, move it up and down, or left and right. So I'll just undo that. We've got property which is the barrel radius. So the particle is actually fired out of a barrel, if you think about it, and by adjusting the barrel radius we can actually change the size. In fact, I'm just going to change the properties here just so you can, just to help you know, the particle radius. So the particle radius at the very bottom is the size of the particles themselves, each individual particle. So I'm going to make them a little bit larger. I'm going to start just there, just so you can actually see it. So like I said, the barrel radius then changes the size of the barrel. You know, how wide should that barrel be? Thing to be aware of, obviously, with the barrel radius is, although we're looking at them going left and right, it's actually increasing. Think of the barrel as a circle, so the circle's getting bigger, so it's getting bigger up and down as well. And you'll see that particles getting higher, and they're sort of stretching out towards the bottom as well. So like I said, it's just a massive, it's a circle that's getting bigger as we adjust the barrel radius. Okay. Then we've got particles per second. So how many particles is that barrel actually firing out? You see, you can increase that, and the more I do that, the more it sort of fills up. Okay, at that point. So it was originally set to 60, but I could even decrease it a bit, maybe. So maybe I don't want it to fire at 60 per second. I just want 5 particles, sorry. per second. So as we're approaching 5 seconds now, 25 particles should have been fired out. Okay, then you've got the direction itself. So at the moment it's pointing up, but I can go 90 degrees, and that should be about the right. There we go. And you know, I could go the other way, minus 90. So I can kind of, you know, decide where I want the particles to actually fire out. So by default it's shooting them up, but we can kind of point it in other directions too. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to have a look at gravity, you see, because gravity is tied into this. Because if this is at the moment currently firing them up, why are they falling back down again? So that's a gravity property, and we'll have a look at that in a second too. We've also got a direction random spread, so that kind of just increases the randomness of where they go once they've been fired out of that barrel. And we've got the velocity, so how fast they come out. And you'll see the faster I fire them out, the higher up the particles will obviously shoot because they're coming out straight up. However, once they've been fired up, they will still fall down. So gravity will still pull them down. What's quite interesting there is, I guess, so that velocity controls, like I said, the particles when they first come out, how quickly they're fired out. So like I said, if we increase that, they're fired out. They go further before they drop down. Whereas if we decrease, if we go back to the original there and then decrease it, you'll see they don't fire out very much before gravity starts to pull them down. So I'd say that even if you want to control the direction of these particles, you've got controls that do both sort of those particles when they first come out and towards the end of their tail, if you think about it, because velocity would control where they go from here when they come out of the actual barrel, and the gravity controls them at the end, really. So at some point the velocity drops and the gravity increases. So you kind of have a way even of controlling particles at different points in this tail. Okay, turn that back down to 0. And what else have we got on here? And then we've got just the color itself. Sorry, we have a random spread for the velocity as well. So I guess that changes the velocity speed on the particles a little bit. So they're not all firing out exactly the same. If they were, they would all follow just the exact. They're probably just following a path exactly behind one another. So here there's a bit of randomness because the velocity differs slightly from each particle. And then like I said, you've got your color and your particle radius, which was the size of each individual particle. Okay, you can make them as big or small as you like. All right, so that's the particle properties, the Cannon, properties for this particle. And I just wanted to have a look at the gravity as well. Okay, I know I've spent most of this tutorial just going through the rules. Oh, this does this, this does this. But once you understand that, you'll find actually we'll just set up the rules and boom, it should sort of do what we want. So we've actually got the force of gravity, and in fact, again, I'll just change the direction so it's pointed that way a bit. And you'll notice if gravity's stronger, it's pulling it down quicker. And if it's weaker, again, they're firing for longer. Again, it also has a randomness to it if you want to use that. And it has a direction as well. So who says gravity has to pull down? So gravity might be pulling something up to the side. Okay, so you can choose wherever you want gravity to actually pull that as well. So you'll see now gravity's up here. They're firing in that direction and then they get pulled down. Okay, so I'm just going to reset that. Right, and now we're just going to create some snowfall from that. And what I'm going to do is just increase their size, like I said, just to make it easier to see in the tutorial. Now, I guess that does kind of hide the, you can see where the sort of beginning point of that is. So maybe I'll keep them about that size, okay, hopefully. Then we can, nope, it hides it at 6. There we go. Right. So to start off with, there's our sort of cannon. Okay, this little circle. It's kind of difficult to see there. I wonder if we can just zoom in a little bit. Oh, it makes it smaller. So, but there's a little sort of crosshair there, and that's our cannon where it fires from. So I can move that around, position that wherever I want, and that's important to note because there's actually, in a sense, 2 ways you could move this around. If you remember, we created a solid and we placed this in a solid. I'll just lock up the background layer so I don't move that. And what you want to be careful about is that when you do move the particles, that you do end up moving the cannon here and not the layer itself. And I'll explain what the difference is. You'll notice that the particles themselves are kind of disappearing and going off screen. They can move around anywhere they want inside that layer, But if I click the layer and start to move the layer around, you'll notice there's a cutoff. They don't go outside the actual layer line, so you can see there's a border for it, and they won't leave or work outside of that. So if you start to move the layer around instead and say, oh, okay, I want to, you know, position the particles like that, well, you'll just cut them off, if that kind of makes sense. So they always sort of work within their own, that layer frame, that solid that we created. So you've got to make sure, like I said, that you move the cannon instead, and not the layer. I've moved it around quite a lot. See if I can get it back to its starting position. There we go. Okay, so now that we've done that, like I said, I'm going to move the cannon. The reason I'm going to move it up is obviously because I want the snow to begin off screen. So I wanted to start up here and then fall down. So we start to think about where these things come from. We're going to think about how fast the snow would fall, what color it will be, things like that. So really, let's change its direction. So we're firing the particles down. Okay, let's increase the barrel radius. Again, keep in mind, like I said, that because it's a circle that's increasing in size, that means it's also increasing up and down, and I'll show you why that's important in a second. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch these out so they reach sort of each end. So that, there we go. So they do fill up the screen. Now the thing is, I don't want to just move the cannon, say up here, that little circle. I don't want to just put that there, because if I do that and I go to the beginning, notice that the barrel is still on the screen, and you'll see that particles are just appearing on the screen, because obviously the barrel, like I said, as being a circle, is still here somewhere, and so particles are just appearing in that, and snow needs to appear off screen and then drop in. So I may need to raise that up slightly. Okay, but once I've done that, hopefully, again, you can see there's still popping up a few here, so that means that my barrel is still on the screen. So I'm going to just move it up a little bit more. Okay, and hopefully then they'll start to fall in. Right, now the thing is, because I've set the direction for these to go straight down, that means the direction is they're being fired down, but gravity is also pulling them down. And what I would say is I don't really need both at this point, and it can get a bit confusing with both of them on. So I'm going to turn force to 0 on gravity. So there's no gravity now, and I'm just using velocity instead. And the reason I'm doing that is, like I said, just so I don't have two different properties that are doing the same thing, because then they might be moving faster than I want them to. And is it gravity pulling them down faster, or is it the velocity? And I'm also using my RAM preview to play it, because it's quite easy to kind of scrub through and think, yeah, that looks right, but you're not looking at it at the right speed. So speed is also a judgment that you want to make. But I'm going to hurry up now, because my tutorial time actually on this video is going to run out. So I was going to say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these slightly larger. Now this is where I recommend you guys have a play with it, and I'm going to give these a color. Now rather than going with white, I'm going to use a color picker and pick something that should be white on screen, because what you find is, actually looking at that, it's a little bit blue. So white wouldn't work, it'd stand out. But the reason it works on here is because obviously it matches the color of that. It's, you know, to our eyes that appears generally to be white, but it's not. It's a little bit more towards blue. So that really doesn't, they just look like big blocks. So I'm going to just soften them up. I'm just going to apply a blur. So I'm going to go to a Gaussian blur, and I'm going to drop that on there as well. And it really only has one value, which is sort of blurriness, and you can just adjust how soft you want. And what it also does is it not only gets rid of the harsh square shape, but it sort of gives a bit of semi-transparency around the edges. Okay, let's drop that to fit. So what it hopefully starts to do as well then is starts to give it that look of snow. Yeah, so the video tutorials that I create here generally don't have a length longer than 15 minutes. So I think I've got about 50 seconds left. So I was going to say that's kind of started it off. To be honest, there's more I could do with that, and I could, like I said, play around, have a look at not just speed, but to give it a bit of depth. Why not now duplicate the snow layer and change the properties on the second one, so we have smaller particles or something like that, give it a bit more depth, so it looks like they're further in the background. Maybe play with the random spread a bit, see if it gives it the feeling of wind sort of blowing through, so they're not just falling straight down, they're sort of moving a little bit side to side. So you can change a lot of things, and I'd recommend you guys have a bit of a play with that. But hopefully that's giving you a better idea now what a particle system actually is. Okay, like I said, it's a bunch of controls, you set it up, and then the animation takes place based on that. Okay, have a play and enjoy.